Hello, Gareth here. How are you? I hope you are well. Me, I've got a bit of a watery eye. By the way, this is Oita City, and this is also Oita Prefecture. And Oita Prefecture has a lot of cedar trees, and they produce pollen around this time of the year, and that gives me a watery eye. And I also have a little bit of a dry throat, but otherwise I'm not too bad. So anyway, in today's lesson, by the way, can you hear the birds? It's beautiful, isn't it? Really, really beautiful. So in today's lesson, we're going to paint children on a beach, and you're going to learn 3 things. So the first thing is how to paint a very delicate and beautiful sky, and it looks very complicated and very, very beautiful, but it is actually very simple. We need just 2 colors, 2 blues, and when we paint the sky, it's basically just 3 big patches, well, 3 or 4 big patches, and then we just add a little bit of detail. It will surprise you how easy it is, but the final result is quite impressive. Then secondly, we're going to paint a beach, and I'm going to show you how to create subtle texture, which is what you need when you paint the surface of a beach. It's a lot of fun to do, and it looks very good. And then thirdly, this is the most difficult thing. We're going to draw and paint figures, in this case children. And the figures are really amazing, and the postures are really, really good. But the important thing is, and what you're going to learn, is when you draw figures, you have to imagine a vertical line, and sometimes you have to imagine a horizontal line too. And by doing this, it will help you much more easily work out the angles of the figures, like the shoulders, and also the basic proportions. So what I'm going to do now is explain that in more detail using the reference photo. So let's begin. Here's a tip for drawing figures. Have an imaginary vertical line in your head. Now, using this line, you can work out the angles of, for example, the shoulders and the legs by just comparing them to this imaginary line, vertical line. It is so helpful. Also, for example, if we're drawing the arm and we get down to the hand, we can find the bottom point by having an imaginary horizontal line, and we can compare it to the figure next to the boy, the girl, where her hands are. So in this way, we can get the angles and proportions right. This painting is going to be very simple apart from the figures. So I'm going to have the beach about here. And then the sea about here. So I've got a reference image that I'm looking at, and now I have to think about how big I'm going to make my figures. So I think about this kind of size, and then one here, and then one here. And I want them in this corner because that will look best. So begin about there and then end about here. But I also have to think about shadows. I think I'm going to give them quite short shadows and have the sun very high up in the sky. So here we go. The first thing I'm going to do is roughly work out where the shoulders are, about here. Then the angle of the body, about here. And then do these shorts. And then the legs. So take your time with the legs and really look carefully at the very, very subtle curves that you get in the legs. If you copy them accurately, then they will look really, really good. So I think that looks very good. It looks very real. And then her arm comes down to about here. And again, very, very subtle curves. Take your time, look carefully. And I need to make these arms the same length. And it seems obvious, but sometimes you'll make one bigger than the other. Now this is a difficult bit because I'm going to change this. I'm going to have this hand a bit different, I think. I'm going to have it like this. And she's grabbing a net. I think that looks a bit better. Then up here, this, and then the cap. So really look carefully at the cap. So it goes like that, then it goes up a bit, almost like a straight line, then it curves and then comes down, and then here it's like that, almost a straight line again, and then here curving. So the trick is to see everything as shapes. Okay, that will do. And then she's holding a bucket. Like that. So that's one figure. Then let's move on to the next one. And this one is quite tricky. And what I'm doing is I'm checking like his chin here. If I move across horizontally, where does it hit or line up against this girl? And then I look at my photo reference image and see if that's roughly the same place. And if it is, then I'm doing okay. So when you do the neck, you really have to look at the angles and get them right, because they're very subtle. Is it slightly inclined? Is it completely vertical? You'll be surprised when you look carefully. And always in your mind, you need an imaginary horizontal line and vertical line, and you're always comparing like the angle of his back with that imaginary vertical line. And then when I want to know where does it end, I look where, if I have an imaginary horizon line, horizontal line, where does it line up with this girl? And is that the same as the photo? So that's looking fairly good, except he's armless. And maybe his neck is a bit too long. Now his arm goes straight down. I'm going to have a slight bend in it because I think that doesn't look so good. Slight bend, that's a big bend. Okay. Now, don't worry if you get the hands a bit wrong. This hand is not so great. They're one of the most difficult things to paint. But you have to start at some point trying to paint them. So I think that definitely looks passable. And then one more figure. And maybe make her closer. Do not make the figures evenly spaced, because it's not so interesting. And I'm going to get my eraser. Actually, it just looks very strange. I'm going to have this a bit higher because I don't want it overlapping with the next child, because that'd be quite difficult to paint. Okay, then she comes about here. And hair, it goes up slightly here, and then it comes out here. All little subtle things, but you need to try and get them right. And then her skirt ends about here. Leg. And what we can do is look at negative spaces as well, like, is the gap here right? Okay, and then up here, her arm comes out like that, and then like that. So I'm looking very carefully. The angle here, or this line, is slightly down. And the more you begin to see these angles correctly by comparing them to an imaginary vertical and horizontal line, just the better you'll get at drawing. So just a suggestion of an arm there. But can you see, like with their hair, just these subtle lines make it look so good, so realistic. Okay. So I'm very happy with this figure. I don't want to erase too much because I just don't like being that fussy, to be honest. And her hair comes down here just a little. I didn't see that, but that looks more realistic now. So you really have to relax and just take your time and look very carefully. Yeah, it's never perfect. But sometimes it's good. And I think that's pretty good. So just check my lines again. So my C is going to be about here. Just a light line to indicate that. My sand is going to be about here. So this looks a little bit messy here, so I might just clean that up a little. Yeah, and there we go. Doesn't really matter about if it's a bit messy here because this is going to be very dark, so you're not really going to see it. The angle of his head is a bit wrong, but to be honest, I don't think that matters too much. So there we go. The drawing is finished. Now I'm going to paint the sky. So this is going to be a very simple sky and also soft. So by simple, one way it's going to be simple is I'm basically using only one or two colours, and it's also simple because I'm basically going to have a big bit of blue here, a big bit of blue here, and a little bit here. Then maybe at the bottom, a little bit blue as well. So it's quite a simple pattern. But within that pattern, I'm going to add lovely details that you will see. And the final sky will actually look quite, not complicated, but quite a subtle and not so simple sky. But once you see how I planned it, you will realize that it is actually very, very simple. So first thing, I'm going to get a flat brush and just wet the surface of the paper. Around the figures, you do have to be careful because sometimes the pencil will smudge. Okay, there we go. Now it's actually too wet, so I have to wait a little while. But that gives me time just to think about my colours and to mix up the right kind of colour. So first, I want a very light blue. So I use my light blue colour. And if I think the brush is too wet, I wipe it on my rag, and that takes some of the water off the brush. That's very important when you're doing wet in wet, because if your brush is very wet, the paint is just going to explode across the surface of the paper. So I'm using my pointed oval brush. And you see how I'm leaving these little white bits up here? This is going to give us a really beautiful effect. Now, one of the really difficult things here is that you'll cover the whole surface of the paper in blue paint and leave almost no white. So you really have to be very, very careful not to do that. So they look too similar. So what I might do is make this one a little bit shorter. And then that looks a little bit better. Okay, and then down at the bottom, it needs to be a really light blue. And I'm not going around the figures because it just will look not very good. I can wipe the blue off later. Okay, I think that's quite nice. Then I'm going to use my darker blue. And at the top here, I'm going to add a little bit. So my eyes are squinted so that I can see the overall effect and not get caught up in details. Well, that looks absolutely beautiful. Maybe I've got a vanity problem, or I'm just being honest. I was a bit worried actually that it wouldn't work out. And because this is like a watercolor demo, I don't think I should do any more. I think if I was painting this just for myself, I might try and do a bit more and make it even better, but let's just keep it simple because it'll be easier for you to do, and also if it looks good then that's enough, right? Yeah, and you see how we've got these lovely subtle effects in the sky? It wasn't too difficult, right? Yeah, so let's leave that to dry. Oh, but I forgot. What we're going to do now is take the blue out of these figures. Especially where it's going to be light. Now you do want to do this while the paint is wet, ideally. So I call using a tissue using the artillery because it's really powerful and it gives a good effect, but as you can see you can't really do very small areas. So for the small areas we need to get a brush like this one. A liner brush might do. This is a bamboo brush that's very long, and basically I dry it and then I go over the arm area. Now you're probably not going to get it pristine white. The paint will to some extent stain the paper. But luckily, because the paint at the bottom here, the blue paint, was very watery, it's not, and very pale, it's not too difficult to remove a lot of it. If I'd used paint that was this strong down here, then I really would have quite a hard time. Yeah, and I think that will do. So let's leave that to dry. Now we're going to paint the beach. So this is a bit tricky because the beach is simple, but at the same time it has a few subtle textures. Oh, let me switch my light on. So I think I'm going to use this pointed oval brush. I'm going to get some yellow ochre and a touch of alizarin crimson. And then lower down here, I'm going to do slightly darker yellow. So my yellow ochre, touch of red, and a touch of blue. Whoops, too much. Yeah, there we go. A kind of browny colour. And if I can get some white bits in here, then it looks even better. So because I'm using a fairly small brush and going across, what happens is eventually the brush runs out of water and you get this dry brush effect. So that's basically how you achieve that. And now the tricky thing here is to have some texture, but not to overdo it. And let's just paint these corners. And now I'm going to spray. Never spray directly, spray horizontally. And I'm going to do some splatter. maybe too many white marks. There we go. I think that looks quite nice. Then at the bottom, the paint is beginning to gather, so I get some tissue and then I just run it along the bottom, and it's slightly touching the bottom edge and picking up the excess paint. That way I don't get any cauliflowers. Ooh. Okay, let's leave it to dry. This has now dried and we're going to paint the sea. So I'm using my liner brush for this. So I'm using light blue and a darker blue, making it quite watery. Then I'm going to start at the top. I'm not worrying about the figures, I'm just going to paint straight over them for now. What is a priority is trying to get this line horizontal. Then after that, I want a dry brush effect. I would have liked a bit more white showing through, but there we go. Okay, let's leave that now to dry. What I could do is take out some of this blue though. I forgot to do this when I did the sand. So you can't completely remove all the paint. There'll be some very faint staining, but that's not too bad. And we can remove this yellow at the bottom. At least some of it. Okay, now let's leave that to dry. Now I'm going to paint the figures. So I use a mix of yellow ochre with a touch of alizarin crimson. So my bamboo brush is best for this. It allows me to carefully paint shapes. The hands are particularly difficult to paint. So I'm starting here because I will move across this way, and so my hand will not be going into wet paint. Whereas if I started here and went over this way, there's a good chance I would stick my hand in the paint. And when you're doing something like this and you need a lot of control, it's a good idea to have your hand on the paper. And if you make a mistake, just get some tissue and press down, and you should remove most of the paint. Then I'm using pure yellow ochre for this hat. The pencil marks are probably a bit too strong. And then maybe a light blue. For this hat. And now I think I'll let that dry and then do the rest of the clothing. So here I need to remove some paint, so I didn't see that. Just be careful not to put my hand in the wet paint. It's very easy to forget. But if you do that, then just wipe it out with the tissue, the mark you've made, and then redo it. So you have to do this a few times. Going over the same area again and again. And there we go. So let's leave that to dry. Now it has dried, and I'm going to paint the clothes. And also the bucket. Okay. I'm starting here because by the time I've painted everything else, I'll come back and do this. And by that time, I hope this will be dry and the two colours will not bleed into one another. But I have to be careful not to put my hand in the wet paint. If you've got too much water on your brush, just dab it on your rag. And if there's still too much water, keep dabbing it until it's right. Maybe I'll give him a red cap. I'm not super happy with that hat, but it will do. And then hopefully these shorts have dried. And we're not going to get any bleeding. So one of the things I like about this brush compared to a liner brush is, with a liner brush you sometimes get drips of water running down and then onto the paper, and it causes a bit of a mess. But that doesn't seem to happen with this brush. Okay, quick. In we go. Oh, and look at that. Hey dear. So let's get a little bit of red, and hopefully it's too wet. Just have to be a bit more careful. Whoop, too wet. And then hopefully this paint below is dry. Looks like it. Oh, there we go. Maybe curve this a tiny bit more. You have to be very careful. But if you make a mistake, you saw what I did with the tissue, and I recommend you do that. And if you do get a dark mark here that you can't remove with the tissue, just let it dry, then with a brush and just water, scrub it, and then use tissue and keep wiping it up. And do that several times, and hopefully you should get rid of most of that mark then. Okay, let's leave it to dry. Now it has dried, and I'm going to do shadowing. So I'm making a mix of light blue and a touch of red. So I'm going to copy the photograph, and I think roughly I'm going to copy the photograph, and I think the sun is coming from this direction, and so we're going to get shading on the right hand side. So So here I'm doing it a bit watery, and then on the far side a bit darker. And once again, if your brush is too watery, then just wipe it on your rag. I'm not copying the shadows exactly as I see them on the photograph, because it's very complicated and I like to keep it simple. There, I've made a mistake, so get some tissue and let's just dab. I've got a line going down, curving like this. Yeah. I knew it would be like that before I looked at the image, but when I looked at the image, it was just like that, so that's good. And it's dark here, but light here. And then let's look at the handles. This one is light, and this one is dark. And yeah, I should have here tried to leave that light. I can touch it up later with some white paint, so it's not a major issue. And then the legs, add a bit more red. Yeah, I think that's okay. Okay, I think that looks quite good. And maybe it should be a bit darker here. Okay, that looks quite nice. Then let's use this dark blue over here. And then we're going to do the shadow. And I'm going to just make a small shadow, very small, simple shadow, beginning about here and going across like that. Here's where the bucket is, and body and head. And if you don't quite like it, just use the tissue and erase. And I think that looks quite nice. It's very simple shadow, and I might just darken the bottom here. It's not really like that, but I think it just looks better. And then maybe there's some kind of arm here The thing is, when you look at real shadows, sometimes they don't look very natural, to be honest. Look quite weird. So that's one of the problems. You don't want it to look too weird, otherwise the viewer just thinks you're bad at painting, and truth is you could have painted it correctly, but it just looks a bit strange. Okay, so the tissue, as you can see, is very handy, but be careful you're not using the same bit every time, otherwise it will put paint back on the paper. Okay. And there's a lot of creases in these shorts, which I don't really want to do too much of, so I'm just going to try and look for the main ones, because it'll look too messy, to be honest. And just include them. Yeah, I'm not sure what I think of that yet. Designer creases, that's what I need. So I'm not too happy with that at the moment, so I'm going to come back to that. Okay, what we're going to do with these, just look a bit too flash, don't they? Okay, get rid of it for now. I think that looks a tiny bit better. It's still not great. Look a bit like camouflage shorts or something like that. Okay. Well, that will have to do. I'm not super happy about him. Haven't painted him so well. Okay, then the shadow, make sure it's in the same, roughly the same direction. Okay, not too bad. Okay, I think that angle is a bit wrong. The shape is right. So one more time, make it a bit higher. Okay, so not too bad. So let's leave that to dry, and then we're going to do the hair and the nets. Now let's do the hair. So basically make a dark colour, blue, some red and some yellow ochre. And if you've got that already on the palette like I have here, then just use that or add to it. Okay. So now that looks quite nice. Hopefully we can salvage this figure. I think painting somebody from the side can be quite challenging. Okay, and then this. Net. So you do one side, then the other. I'm just changing the position of this one a little bit. Ooh. Get some tissue. I made that way too thick. I should have used the pointed end of the brush a lot more, but there we go. I think that's okay. Yeah, maybe here. There's something. And here. And try to make sure that this line and this line are following on from one another and that the angle doesn't change. Okay, maybe that will do. And something I forgot to do is this arm here. There's just a touch. Like that. So I think that's okay. So I'm going to let this dry, and then I'm going to get some white paint. Here we go, titanium white, and wet my brush, dry it, take it direct from the tube, and then maybe dab it on here to dry it a bit. Hopefully I'm going to get a dry brush effect, and I'm going to have it come down vertically. So let's try again. It's just a subtle effect. This one worked out best. The other two were a bit too much. Needed to be a bit more dry brushy. And then a few highlights. So have to be careful of this wet paint. So it's probably best to wait for it to dry and then do this. And I think that's pretty good. So let's leave that to dry. Now I'm going to add a few waves to the sea. So I'm getting a slightly darker blue. Let's get some tissue just in case it's wrong, and then I can wipe it up quickly. If you can, you want the edges to be tapered. Or, sorry, the very ends. You want them to get quite thin at the end. Looks a little bit more natural. But it's a little bit tricky to achieve. And I'm going to have to do these again because they look too light. And then further in the distance, maybe we should do a darker blue. Yeah, maybe that's okay. Yeah, and I think that looks quite nice. Okay, let's finish there then. Review time. So overall, I'm really happy with this painting. It's got a lightness to it. It's got some lovely colours in it, and it's really quite a simple painting. So for those reasons, I really like it. But I am very disappointed with this figure, to be honest. So let's break it down into parts. So first of all, the sky. So I think the sky is the best part of this painting. It's really quite a simple sky. It's made from using two colours, and it's got a nice delicacy to it and a nice freshness to it. So I'm really happy with that. Then the sea. I think the sea is also quite good. I can see, when I look at it, I can see like the dark distance, and I can see dark waves, but at the same time we've got that white froth, so frothy waves. So I think that works. Maybe it's a little bit messy. Maybe it could be a little bit cleaner, a little bit simpler, but I'm still overall happy with that. As for the sand, I think that's good too, but I do wonder if it needs to be a bit brighter. Is it a little too dull? So I'm not sure about that, but I like these textures. And what I think is nice about this beach is nothing is overdone. There's not anything too contrasting, and I think that's very good. And yet we've got these subtle textures and marks which tell us that it is a beach, and that it has those kind of marks that you do find on a beach. And basically I think it works. Okay, finally the figures. So I'm very happy with this figure. I think this figure works well. Yeah, I think it works pretty well. Maybe if I could make it look just a touch more dynamic, and if I painted it a little bit looser, that might be good. Maybe it's a touch stiff. This figure I'm disappointed with. So it just looks, I'm not sure, like a bad illustration. So maybe I should have made him a little bit fatter and just drawn him a little bit better. I think this particular angle was difficult to do, especially around here. Still, I think it works. And then there are these shorts. Yeah, it was difficult to make them look right. I think I've done an okay job, but and part of me wants to have another go or try to fix it, but if I do, I might make it look even more complicated. So I'm not going to do that. And then this figure, yeah, I'm quite happy with this figure. Maybe I could have done a little bit more delicate shading on this figure, and I might even do just a few touches, because if you look at the photograph, there's some lovely little areas of shade on this dress, and they look very, very nice. So here we go. And all it needs is just a few touches. And I think that will do. And I'm just having a look at this boy and wondering if I can improve him at all. I might make the front of him just a touch bigger. I probably shouldn't do this, but, and that's too dark. And I think that's a tiny bit better. Maybe he needs a little bit more of a chin. Yeah, can you see how just that tiny change has made a big difference? I'm not saying it's really good now, but I think it's a lot better than before. And if you like, you can always do things like soften your shadows. I'm not really going to do that too much, but you can here just go over with pure water and just soften these a little bit if you like. And you can even do nice little touches like a little bit of red, just a tiny bit. Could have a little bit of blue in it. And then you could just add that here, and it can give just an interesting a bit more of an interesting shadow or shaded area. It's also a lot of fun. Ooh. And I think it was a good idea to add that red. And I might do that just here. Oh, and her arm. And hers too. It really is quite fun to do this actually. And there we go. I actually do think that looks better. Maybe there we could add a touch more shade up here on this hat. Yep. And maybe on this hat, for some reason, the shaded area has gone. And add a little bit of blue there. Like that. And I think that's it. Now, let's sign our work. So I do a very simple signature with my bamboo brush, maybe just here, not too close to the corner because you're going to have a mat and a frame and it's going to hide this area here. So you want your signature to show clearly and not be hidden or joining the mat. A G, an N, Gareth Naylor. And I wasn't actually going to sign this work because it's not like a work that I'm like, wow, what a masterpiece. But the thing is, I do it partly for you because it's very important you start signing your work right from the beginning so that when you actually do a really good painting, that you don't spoil it at the end with a really bad signature. And it takes a lot of practice at doing signatures before you get good at them. So there we go, finished. I hope you have a go and I hope you have a good time. So likes, subscribes and comments will be much appreciated. Happy painting and see you in the next video demo.